Hello, you're on a channel that explains complex things simply. Two reasons for today's topic. First, the recent military parade in Beijing marking the 80th anniversary of victory over Japan. Another moment where China presented itself as a confident, powerful state. Second, your questions about China's real strength. How real is this power? What's going on with the economy and debt? Can a single narrow strait really disrupt supplies? What does the tech blockade actually do? Let's look at it without slogans or illusions. China is often treated as a new global superpower, almost the peer of the United States. A vast factory, an unbeatable army, a builder of bridges, roads, and ports across the world. The story goes, here comes the new hegemon of the 21st century. The Chinese century has already arrived, and America and Europe can only accept it. The picture is impressive. The world's second largest economy by nominal GDP and largest by PPP, the biggest standing army, growing more high-tech every year, a space program and nuclear deterrent, mega projects like Belt and Road. For decades, China grew fast, lifted hundreds of millions from poverty, and looked like a machine that only moves forward and doesn't know the word crisis. But the brighter the image, the sharper the question. Is it too idealized? In real politics and economics, there are no invincible machines. Even the strongest empires and most disciplined societies have weak spots. The 20th century already showed how a shiny shop window can hide deep cracks. That's where myths come in. They blur those weak spots, not only in Western media or expert debate, but inside China itself, reinforcing the belief that China's time has come. To gauge the country's real resilience, we'll start with the fundamentals, then turn to the myths. When you analyze China's weak points, you inevitably start with the economy, the source of China's strength for decades, from the world's cheap factory to the world's #2 economy. Yet the bigger it grew, the clearer its internal contradictions became. 1. Export dependence. The model was straightforward: cheap labor, manufacturing for Western markets, capital accumulation. As long as the world kept buying, it worked. But intensified competition changed the risk profile. U.S.-China trade frictions, tougher access to the U.S. market, Europe's talk of de-risking. Key customers no longer want to depend on China the way they used to. Even small order cuts hit margins, jobs, and provincial tax bases. 2. Demographics. China rode a demographic dividend. Hundreds of millions of young, low-cost workers. The one-child policy flipped that dividend. Rapid aging, a shrinking labor force, rising pressure on healthcare and social insurance. For the first time in decades, population is declining. This isn't a forecast. It's happening. The country is aging faster than it's getting richer, and automation can't always replace workers at the right price and skills. 3. Debt. Growth was fueled by investment, factories, roads, housing, backed by huge credit expansion. Now debt at local governments and corporates is so large that many analysts talk about a Chinese debt bomb. Property giants like Evergrande exposed how fragile the system can be. When a sector that was a growth engine for years stalls, confidence stalls with it. To avoid a hard landing, Beijing has to restructure debts, finish socially critical projects, and prevent banking stress from cascading. 4. Overbuilt real estate. China built more than it needed. Whole districts of ghost towers stand empty. That propped up GDP and the optics of development, but stored financial, social, and infrastructure risks. Now the bill is due. Some projects are mothballed, some are loss-making, and maintaining excess infrastructure strains local budgets. 5. Regional inequality. The coast is the showcase. Finance, industry, innovation. Much of the interior looks like a different country in productivity and infrastructure. As growth slows, that imbalance becomes a political and social risk. Transfers from the center help, but the returns on those transfers often diminish over time. 6. The hard pivot. Beijing wants to shift from exports plus investment to innovation plus domestic demand. But households historically save, they don't spend. With patchy social safety nets, people save just in case. And innovation thrives on freedom of ideas, competition, and entrepreneurial risk-taking, hard to combine with heavy-handed, fast-changing regulation. The old model is losing steam. The new one isn't yet fully in gear. Bottom line, China's economic size hasn't vanished, but its quality is changing. External demand is less guaranteed, labor is older and pricier, debt inertia weighs on budgets, and shifting gears requires institutional reform. Now, those myths, they explain why the outside picture often clashes with internal dynamics, and why China's crises sometimes disappear and then suddenly flare up again for outside observers. Myth 1. Endless growth. For decades, China posted high growth. By inertia, many assume the line will rise forever. Economies don't draw infinite straight lines. They hit ceilings, saturation, internal contradictions. Today, growth is slower than pre-COVID, household demand is weak, and property is deflating. The straight line is broken. Expect a plateau with bumps rather than a rocket. Myth 2. Unshakable party control. The CCP has built an extraordinary control system, from internet censorship to mass video surveillance and the social credit idea. It can look omnipotent, but the tighter the control, the sharper the risk of sudden breaks. In 2022, the White Paper protests pushed authorities to roll back zero COVID within days. There were open clashes at Foxconn's Zhengzhou plant. Mortgage boycotts erupted over unfinished housing. Depositors in Hunan protested frozen accounts. Retirees in Wuhan and Dalian rallied against cuts to medical benefits. Youth unemployment hit a record high. Publication of the metric was suspended, then resumed under a new method. Meanwhile, local government financing vehicles, LGFVs, pile up debt, and some economic data vanish from public view. That's not invulnerability. It's the rising cost of maintaining control. Myth 3. Foreign policy omnipotence. China does build roads, ports, and power plants across the globe. But the Belt and Road brings risks with the reach. Borrowers struggle, renegotiate terms, or hand over control. Projects drag on. In some places, contractors need protection. Influence grows, but so do the weak links. The longer the supply and finance chains, the more points where they can be cut. Myth 4. A perfectly unified society. The facade looks monolithic. Inside are different worlds. Xinjiang and Tibet's hardline policies. Hong Kong's special trajectory. The perennial Taiwan question. High youth unemployment. The coast, interior gap, and a strict household registration system. Hukou. That limits mobility to big cities. Not a single slab, but a mosaic that has to be held together every day. Myth 5. The world has already accepted China as leader. In practice, the opposite trend. The US and EU hike tariffs on some Chinese goods. Neighbors build up militaries and train more with the US. Companies move slices of production out of China as a backup. Each external move now costs more than it seems from afar. That's why talking about China's weaknesses isn't criticism for criticism's sake. It's a way to test how solid the foundation really is, and whether those weak spots can slow or even derail the much-discussed Chinese century. No great power stands without resources: oil, gas, metals, water, food. Here, China faces a real challenge that's often underrated. It depends on the outside world. China's economy is resource-hungry: oil, gas, coal, iron, or copper, rare earths. Unlike the US or Russia, China lacks abundant domestic hydrocarbons. Coal has been the backbone for decades, but it no longer covers the needs of a modern economy. Oil is the soft spot. China is the world's largest oil importer. Well over 70% of demand is met by imports. Most of it travels by sea from the Persian Gulf, Africa, and Latin America, which means exposure. The weakest link is the Malacca Strait, a narrow corridor between Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, through which a big share of China's seaborne energy flows. Any blockage, war, or even an accident is a strategic nightmare. Chinese analysts call it the Malacca dilemma. Gas is similar. Pipelines from Russia and Central Asia diversify supply, but dependence remains on partners' stability, politics, and prices. Turkmen gas and Russia's power of Siberia aren't panaceas. They reduce one risk while adding transit and contract risks. Ecology is another constraint. Decades of coal-driven growth fouled air and water. Public frustration and global image costs are rising. Beijing is pouring money into renewables and green tech, but a quick exit from coal is impossible. Expect a long balancing act between environmental pressure and energy reality. Don't forget water. Northern China faces a chronic freshwater shortage. Agriculture and industry in the region are at risk. Beijing is pushing massive south-to-north water diversion schemes, hugely expensive and not risk-free. Resources are the nervous system of the economy. That's why China invests so heavily in Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East, locking in long-term contracts, mines, and ports to protect supply. But the longer the lines, the bigger the logistics and insurance exposure. The U.S. and allies know this. Any major confrontation would target energy and logistics, as well as military assets. Route blockages, sanctions on extraction and processing technologies, turning resources into a strategic Achilles heel. China can build factories and roads, launch satellites, and expand its navy. But without stable access to energy, the machine can stall. Ask what makes a superpower in the 21st century, and you'll hear technology, digital networks, AI, space, robotics. This is where China's ambitions hit external ceilings. The progress is real. Telecoms, a homegrown space program, high-speed rail, mass deployment of surveillance and AI. China isn't just copying anymore. It often leads. Huawei and BYD symbolize that new confidence. But behind the showcase lies a key fact. China still relies on critical technologies controlled elsewhere. Semiconductors. Chips are the basis of everything, from phones to weapons. China has poured money into microelectronics, yet the leading nodes remain out of reach. 5 and 3 nanometer production is concentrated in Taiwan and South Korea. Critical tools and materials sit in the Netherlands, the U.S., and Japan. U.S. controls in 2022 to 2023 sharply limited access to advanced lithography and cutting-edge chips. Result: China can make good, not best-in-class chips. And in the AI race, good often means behind. Aviation. The C919 passenger jet is a milestone, but it still depends on Western engines and avionics under licenses sensitive to export rules. If restrictions tighten, that dependence bites. Military aviation is progressing faster, but commercial remains tied to global supply chains. Pharma and biotech. Investment is massive, yet many platforms and frontier research remain with Western companies and consortia. During COVID-19, China ramped up vaccine production fast, but the trust and average efficacy of inactivated vaccines without boosters lag behind mRNA options. Software. China runs powerful platforms, WeChat, Alipay, TikTok, but core infrastructure, operating systems, industrial databases, engineering software still leans on Western standards. Digital sovereignty is a strategy in progress, not a done deal. Innovation climate. Moving from copycat to idea-driven growth needs freedom to experiment, even if fail. Heavy political control and censorship constrain that. For researchers and founders, stepping outside the official line can threaten careers, sometimes liberty. That's why the U.S. and key partners target tech choke points. Export controls on chips and tools, coordination on AI and cyber. Beijing answers with billions for R&D, national champions, and startup funding. But this is a marathon. Even if China closes one generational gap, the tech frontier moves again. In the 21st century, tech leadership is a weapon. Without it, any superpower remains dependent. On that score, China is still less the master of technology than its hostage. Let's pause here for today. We'll pick up the rest in the next video. Domestic politics, Taiwan, soft power, and scenarios for the next decade. If this analysis helped, subscribe and share.